So I want to welcome everybody. Let's get started. It's really great to have our guests tonight, which are Chris Dabika. Am I saying that right, Chris? Dabika?
Dabika's perfect.
Dabika, okay. He's with our Bristol Select Board. He was the head of the chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So we have a committee underneath our select board. So it's just really cool, that kind of infrastructure, I think. And he'll be giving us an update on progress. And then we have Katie Gallagher, and she's from VNRC. She's head of the Sustainable Communities Program, Director for Vermont National Resource Council. And she's going to talk about what's happening in other communities. And then we have Jonathan Weber. He's the senior manager for Complete Street Program. It's a nonprofit local motion. So he'll be talking about strategies for municipals to increase rates of walking and biking for transportation. So I thought how we would set this up would be that each one of you would talk for like 10 minutes, but save time for questions. And so 5 minutes for questions. So we'll have 15 minutes for Chris, 15 minutes for Katie, and 15 minutes for Jonathan. But we do like to have a questions. And then at the very end, we'll spend the last 15 minutes with questions. A lot of my Bristol team members are here. We have Christine Homer, who is our secretary. Raise your hand. Mark Gibson, who's the vice chair. Mark, where are you? Wave. And Debbie Ramsdell is on our committee, and Pat Sharp, Dave Sharp's wife. Well, I shouldn't say that. Pat Sharp, she was secretary for the Bristol Dems for years and years. Thank you for that. And then we have some new people. Sally Burrell has been around and is a Bristolite, and she is the head of the Commission on Energy, I believe. I'm right there. Who else do we have? Just so you know who you're talking to. Nancy Luke. Nancy, do you want to just say hello? I can't introduce you. Yeah.
I'm Ann's neighbor and have been an avid cyclist for a number of years, and am now riding a recumbent trike.
Whoa. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining.
I used to bike commute to Middlebury when I was working.
Wow.
I'm very interested in transportation alternatives.
And Peg Kamens, I don't know who you are. You want to introduce yourself? Peg?
Yeah, I'm Peg. I live in Bristol Village Co-housing, and I like to bike.
Okay. Good. And who else do I know? All right. Deborah, you're kind of new. Deborah Watchell, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. I'm Deborah, and I work at Mountain Community Health, and I live in Bristol Village Co-housing also, and I'm a cyclist. I love to bike.
Great. And Rebecca, you're new to our community. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry I didn't put my last name in there. Rebecca Ryan, and moved from Huntington, all the way from Huntington to Bristol in September. And my husband and I are both runners and cyclists and really interested in this topic.
Great. And I didn't introduce Ann Wallace because she's so well known in our community. She's one of our Justice of the Peace and is very active in our community. Thank you, Ann.
Nice to be here.
Nice.
I don't think I'm all that well known, for heaven's sakes.
No, I do.
I'm Nancy Luke's neighbor.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So, but I think everybody's been introduced. And so let's go ahead and start, Chris, and talk about what's happening in our bike committee under the select board.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and by extension, the committee here to talk about what we've been up to and what we hopefully will be up to in the future. Just a little bit of background on the organization. We've been around formally for a little over a year and a half. We are the outcome of what is now known as the ad hoc committee. That was a group of people who had gotten together in town to tackle this topic, what is essentially a very broad topic on their own. And they started getting on the select board's radar. The select board liked what they were doing and decided to charter an actual formal committee underneath the select board. Our purpose from the select board standpoint is it's in the name. It's to advise the select board. It's to give them ideas. It's to answer requests from them on specific initiatives that have to do with non-motorized travel in the village and in the town. We are going in front of them in the next select board meeting with an actual formal mission. Just some background information due to some procedural challenges that we've had in the past year. It's been tough to get quorum votes on things like a mission statement. So that's why we're a group that we did not inherit. We have a charter, obviously, but we didn't inherit a mission statement. So our mission statement that we're going to be presenting to the select board is, and this is a mouthful, but we decided to take the path of trying to put as much into this as possible. The Bristol Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee encourages, enhances, and promotes walking and biking in Bristol through the creation, advocacy, and guidance of initiatives that makes the town's roads, sidewalks, and other pathways safer and easier for walkers, runners, cyclists, and other non-motorized users to utilize. Just to kind of break that apart, what it really means is that depending on where you live in Bristol, bicycling, walking, jogging, and anything else that isn't basically a car or a motorcycle, if you're doing those things, there are different challenges, there are different opportunities, there are different concerns, there are different benefits to each of those things depending on where you are in the town. And so what our long-term vision is to wrap our hands around all of those things and to basically make them all as good and as, I don't want to overextend and say as safe as possible, because obviously there's so many things that being walkers, joggers, and bicyclists are out of that person's hands. But we're trying to make this community, the Bristol community, as welcoming to those activities as possible. A lot of what that's going to mean in the future is versus what it means right now, the things that we're doing right now, it's going to evolve. Right now, the first things that were really on our list to do were oriented towards, are oriented towards traffic calming in the police district, with a focus first and foremost on Pine Street. That was identified by the ad hoc committee as a place that people in the village wanted to make sure got dealt with, that anybody who lives or utilizes the village for what's been informally called the big loop or the small loop or things like that, that there's a walking and running kind of loop that you can, depending on your appetite for mileage and for steps, you can keep extending. Pine Street tends to be a common denominator no matter how big of a path you're taking around the village. Consequently, or conversely, Pine Street is also a shortcut. You can end run the stoplight if you're going from North Street, coming south on North Street, and you want to get over to the school or anything like that. You can cut out a lot of the town by zipping down Pine Street. So the convergence of cars that are basically trying to get through town as quickly as possible, with what is probably, with the exception of the Spring Street, Pleasant Street, West Pleasant Street route, the most traveled pedestrian and bike corridor in the village, that can be a challenging combination. So the first thing we're tasked with was traffic calming ideas for that. And that's against the backdrop of the select board having approved a tentative plan and, more importantly, a budget for traffic calming initiatives on Pine Street. About halfway through the year, as we were getting ready to present a formal plan for that, the select board came back to us with concerns that the direction that they had pointed us in, which was basically, if you look at Pine Street from a width perspective, it's not wide enough to technically be a 2-lane road. Like it actually doesn't fit. There's places where I believe it's only 14 feet wide. So that presents problems for 2 cars coming in either direction, in addition, obviously, to anybody that's traveling on the margins of the road. Our plan was to put pedestrian / bike lanes on both sides so that it was effectively a 2-direction one-way road. I know that at a first blush almost sounds counterintuitive, but these are things that exist out there in the public infrastructure world. We had drafted up plans for that. We had gone and visited a variety of communities around Vermont. We had looked at best practices in communities that were similar size, as well as much bigger ones, as to how wide those lanes should be, what kind of stripes there should be, and things of that nature. And that was all baked into the plan. Select Board came back and asked us to actually revisit it as a staged kind of an approach. There was concerns that, given that there was no precedent for this, that some people might be confused by a traffic line layout like that. So what we're presenting to the Select Board at the next meeting next week is a staged approach to that, which would begin with suggestions for additional stop signs on Pine Street first, to actually slow the traffic down that way first, and then test and measure that, see what the results of that are, and if we want to do anything forward from that. Parallel with that initiative, we've been doing a decent amount of both formal and informal outreach to people around the village, as well as around the town and in surrounding areas, for where we can do traffic, where we can look at traffic calming options next. Mountain Street into Deveno Lane is the next place that we're going to look at. As anybody who walks that part of it as the big loop again knows, as you get towards the north end of Mountain and it gets down into the curves that go down and head out to north, that's a tremendously exposed part of that route, because the sidewalk ends, you have these 2 corners, there's no lines on the road. And so if you're walking up or down it, or biking up or down it, it presents similar challenges, if not even greater challenges than the ones that pedestrians and cyclists are presented with on Pine Street. So we're going to be looking at that next, as well as putting in front of them options for a couple new locations for those lit up crosswalks within the village. We've got guidance. We're fortunate to have Ian as our Select Board liaison. And he was the person that got the first one of those put in. He took the initiative to do that. So there's great guidance from him on just some of the best practices around those things. Long term, as I mentioned, we are looking obviously much farther beyond just the police district. We have outreach to the Tri-Town, the group that's doing the Tri-Town bicycle loop. We have outreach to the group that's based out of Middlebury, but includes a lot of the towns in the area that are dealing with, or trying to bring together organizations that are dealing with these subjects in and around Addison County. We have outreach into informal outreach into the group that's spearheading opening up access for mountain biking in Bristol, in and around Bristol. The mob group that's done such great work out at New Leaf Organic, and has done a lot of other work behind the scenes that they'll be rolling out I would assume, in both the short and long term. The majority of people in our organization have direct ties either to bicycling, running, walking, and or the village itself. Myself, I'm a lifelong cyclist. I used to work in and out of the bike industry. I collect bikes, and I bike a lot. I used to, when I lived we lived in West Addison. I used to actually commute by bike into Burlington. So and when I moved to Bristol, I thought that was going to have to end, because the roads to Burlington here are a little bit more, the Moncton Road and 116 that's a higher stakes. I would rather ride on Route 7 than ride a bike on some of those roads. And then once we discovered Plank Road and all the dirt roads and the gravel roads in town, suddenly everything opened up for us again. And I think one of the big goals of our organization is to make sure that people know about how good the gravel riding is down here in Bristol. It's as good as it gets in the state. And I think it's something that with some of the organizations that we have outreach to, there's going to be signage and things like that help those routes become, more well-traveled. And as well, we're going to be looking at initiatives that we can help propose to hopefully make some of those routes safer. So as I'm wont to do, I just talked for a long time without stopping. That in a nutshell is basically what we've been sort of up to. I mentioned briefly that we had some procedural challenges. We unfortunately lost 2 members of our committee that we have not yet replaced. That has challenged us from a standpoint of from a quorum standpoint. That's one of the things that's actually made it hard to get things through procedures and things like that. And we have a couple people waiting in the wings that we're going to present to the select board and hopefully get on the committee. But when you're down 2 people and then 2 people don't show up to a call, a monthly meeting, that becomes challenging to make votes on things. Mark, your question, I think we're technically supposed to have 7 people. We're at 5. So we're going to be replacing the 2 empty seats. We need 5 people for a quorum. And again, like I said, when we're down 2 people and 2 people don't show up, now we have 3. That unfortunately happens a lot more often than we would like. So we've been working with Ian behind the scenes to make sure we're looking at ways of moving things forward, potentially still obviously under the rules that we're chartered under, but making sure that we're able to make forward movement a little bit faster than we've been able to in the last year. So any questions you have? Anne?
Yeah, you mentioned something called the Tri-Town Bicycle Route.
Yes.
I don't know anything about it.
I will, we have one of the things that we're required to do is have a public cloud share. I will send a link to you all so that you can see all of the documentation, including we have a lot of information on the Tri-Town Bicycle Loop. It's a group, I don't want to get this wrong because maybe Jonathan or maybe Katie knows this as well. And I know Susan, who was potentially going to join us, it doesn't look like she's on. She knows a little bit about this as well. I believe the group that started that was out of either Virgins or Middlebury. And it was basically a group that got together to formally map out a route that connects Virgins, Bristol, and Middlebury. Like basically like what is the best bicycle route? What is the one that's the most traveled? And to start to build out signage, not unlike they have in other communities, that basically turns into, like something that people could research, get information on, like something that's geared towards tourism, something that's geared towards people being able to formally utilize routes that everyone is either informally utilizing or say using Strava or apps like that to track things like that. So it's a pretty cool initiative. I haven't been in a call on that in about 2 months, but I'll make sure that in our share, all the information is up to date so you can read about it.
Great.
Other questions?
Well, I have a question. I live
Yes,
on
Linda.
Pine Street.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
everything you said about Pine Street is absolutely true.
Well, and I'm tempering I'm trying to stay very unbiased here, but yes, Linda, what is your question? I can't wait for this.
No, I think stop signs is a good start. The traffic's pretty fast, and that is, I think, something that we need, especially coming from Maple and Pine where they meet, right there, because a lot of traffic comes very fast from where the I don't know how I would say it, but further up Pine Street from the dump
Yeah.
road
Yeah.
through. If we can stop them before they get onto the rest of Pine or turn into Maple, that would really help because they pick up speed there for some reason.
Yeah, it's been an educational process for all of us on the committee. We do have, and just I'll say off to the side, we've got a nice list of people that we liaise with. One of them is obviously Chief Nason. He is on board with traffic calming, lowering the speed limit, all of those things. And he shared data with Ian from the last time they put one of those speed camera, your speed is things on Pine Street. And what was interesting was, and we've learned all kinds of things about how these laws are actually developed and how speed limits are created and then changed. One of the things they found from the last time they did this, and obviously this data I believe is 2 years old, so it's not terribly old, it's not terribly out of date, was that, and this could have been behavioral because there was this camera on there, but what they found was that a lot of people were actually driving under the speed limit on Pine Street, which surprises all of us, obviously, especially people who spend time on Pine Street. But one of the things that they said is that's actually good. Like if you're looking to lower the speed limit somewhere, you actually want to see people driving under the speed limit because it actually makes the case easier than in some cases than if people are driving over the speed limit, because there's this psychological factor that says people drive at a speed that they feel is safe for that road. So if people are driving 40 in a place marked 30, it's because they think it's actually safe to drive that speed, and you can actually have it's counterintuitive when you first hear it, but it's been an interesting process when we looked at some of the actual data we had at Pine Street. That said, we're still carrying forward with understanding that it's such a highly traveled pedestrian and bike route, and B, it is, I'll throw cost prohibitive out there. It is extremely cost prohibitive to put in sidewalks on that. They scoped that years ago. So that's just not an option to do that. So we are going to continue to look for that. Peg screen, sorry.
Hi, thank you, Deborah. Chris, well, I don't know, Mark, if you were answering my question, but my question was about making 116 towards Middlebury safer, because right now it feels really hazardous to ride on that road. And Mark wrote traffic calming, and I wasn't sure if you were answering my question, but I can't see how you would do that on 116.
So 116 is interesting because it's a state road, and there are places where we intersect with it that I believe we have a degree of domain over it, but I'm not 100% sure how much control the select board has over that actual road. I will say that one of the things that we're going to be investigating down the road is I don't want to overstate this, but Plank Road, obviously where it crosses 116. And I know some of you have been here for a long time. There's a name for that road that isn't 116 where it hits there. But there's people that said we should put stop signs there, that should also be seen as, because it can be a challenging intersection to cross if you're using Plank Road and heading out, towards Middlebury on a bike or jogging. That can be a pretty dicey intersection. That did not meet with any kind of negative reaction when Ian heard it. So I would have taken that. He would have said something that's like, we can't do anything there because it's a state road. I know we have some purview over that stuff. And then in other cases, we can't. Like where you're saying it goes to Middlebury, Bristol's not going to be able to widen the road, as an example. And I think what ends up happening, and some of it is what's going on with this tri-town bike loop, is offering up safer potential routes or less car traveled roads. So there's only so much we can do on a stretch like 116. And you asked Plank Road crossing where, not 116. Where the cemetery is across the street from the farm, that intersection there.
That's Burpee Road.
Burpee Road.
Yeah,
Yes.
crossing Plank Road.
Yes.
Plank Road doesn't cross 116.
I apologize. I got that wrong.
That's okay.
That's true.
One-
I have one more comment. They're going to rip up Pine Street completely for this water pipe. I wonder how that's going to affect everything.
That'll be interesting to see. From living there on Pine Street, as well as all of us in the, I have to toggle between the village and what its official name is, the police district. There's not a lot of room to make that road wider. You know, there's telephone poles there. Again, we measured the width of the road in numerous places along it when we were doing our initial survey, and we've gone back and done it again for the suggestions on the stop signs. And it presents multiple challenges. And when they go and repave that, it's not like it's going, I can't picture it gaining much in the way of width, given any number of things. I live on the corner of corner of Munsell and West Pleasant, and they tried to scope West Pleasant as a place to put in sidewalks last year. And you're fighting against gravity trying to do something on some of these streets, because there's no good side of the street to put a sidewalk in. There's no room, there's no this, there's no that. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens there. Hopefully that happens fast. That's all I can say.
Okay, I think we need to go on to our next speaker. Thank you, Chris. Please stay on because we'll have questions at the
Yes,
end.
you're welcome. You're welcome, of course.
Okay, so Katie, what's happening in other communities in Vermont?
Okay, well, thank you everybody for having me tonight. And as Linda said, I direct the Sustainable Communities Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is a statewide environmental organization. But as part of that work, I also coordinate a coalition called Transportation for Vermonters, which Jonathan Locomotion is a part of, and many others. It's a very wide group focused on safe and sustainable transportation, primarily in the kind of advocacy sphere. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So, and I guess I'll say from the start, I come at this from primarily a planning perspective. I have a planning background, and with a lot of towns that we've talked to and worked with, you know, planning is both a place that is necessary to start in order to do things like bring a budget to a select board. It's also generally required or necessary for getting funding from state grants and other funding means. So it's my personal bias, but also I think a really helpful place for a lot of towns to start. This slide I pulled from a previous presentation I had, and I think I'm preaching to the choir to this group and talking about all the benefits of reducing our driving, but just to say that there are many different benefits that come with alternative transportation options. Different communities will kind of hold on to one or more of these different pieces. And so thinking about what resonates most with your community and trying to communicate the benefits is really important kind of from the get-go. So I look at this as like shorter and longer term solutions. It kind of varies in the timeline for different communities, but data collection is incredibly important to start, to just get a better sense of the lay of the land of where your community is starting from. So where are people going? How are they getting there? When, what times are they coming? You know, you also have tourists as well as residents, commuters, so on and so forth. So this is showing on the left here some more kind of national level data we have from the census. This is on the map data, which shows, looking at my town of Waterbury here, the number of folks that come into the town to work versus those that live and work here versus those that are coming out. We also have things like ridership count. So this is coming from Green Mountain Transit data for the Mad River Valley, but you can also have walking and biking counts as well at the more local level. And then we have more kind of new high-tech tools like Strava heat maps, which are being used more frequently by transportation planners to get a really granular sense of where people are actually biking or walking and running in your community. And it might highlight some things like, oh, the main sidewalk that we thought people were using is here, but actually people are going kind of around here, and why is that? And you can dig in and prioritize a bit more from having that type of analysis. That said, especially because our communities are so small in population and size, being able to get on the ground is really, really helpful for many of the towns that I've worked with in terms of collecting more meaningful data and actionable data, especially when you're trying to identify some of those more specific barriers and opportunities, which Chris was just kind of alluding to, in figuring out specific streets or even specific sections of streets. So this might look like a walk audit. So, you have a group of either volunteers, or maybe it's a couple representatives from your select board and planning commission or walk by committee. And you are getting on the ground and, trying to imagine yourself, and some folks are doing this on a day-to-day basis anyways, but using kind of a fresh set of eyes to determine what barriers might come up with folks. So maybe there's an existing sidewalk, but then you realize that it actually just kind of stops in the middle of nowhere, and maybe someone who's pushing a stroller in a wheelchair can't actually get over that bump. So what are those really specific barriers or challenges for people? Another way to get at this information is asking your community members to pinpoint on a map, could be a paper map, could be an online map, but pinpoint where there are certain barriers. So where is that sidewalk deteriorating, and where might there be certain opportunities? You can also get at this through a survey. So this is, again, you could do through a mailing survey. A lot of towns are going to farmers markets, going directly to different places, grocery stores, places where people are, to try to get the best information, which is probably one of the biggest challenges with using surveys, is actually getting data from a well-distributed kind of sample. But another really great way to use a survey is in combination with a project, a pilot project, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. But getting a sense of how people feel, especially in terms of safety and comfort, before and during a certain intervention. So if you're putting in, a temporary sidewalk or a crosswalk, you can ask people, how did they feel before that crosswalk was there, and how did they feel while that crosswalk was there? Did they feel more or less safe? And that's a really important data point to, again, be able to bring back to your select board, or bring back to a larger funder to be able to get the backing to move forward with that. So with engagement, this is kind of my slide dedicated to local motion. So I'm not going to dig too much in here, because Jonathan will talk more about this. But pop-up and pilot projects are a really fantastic way to, again, get this data collection from both feedback from community members, but also measuring the success in different ways of different types of interventions. Local motion provides a lot of different types of traffic calming measures, different opportunities for towns to try to implement. This could be a day-long project. It might be a couple of weeks. So these are a couple examples. And again, I won't go too much into depth here, but it's a really great way to get that information, but also get people involved and actually being a part of that work and feeling what it's like to have that crosswalk or have that sidewalk or bump out or whatever it is. And it's just fun. Okay, a couple other examples we have here. On the left, this is Walk to Shop, which is an initiative of Net Zero Vermont. They are trying to bridge the gap between folks who already live within walking distance to, say, a grocery store, a regular shop that they go to, but they might be driving because, well, how are you going to carry your groceries? So they are trying to provide these discounted trolley bags that are pretty common in a lot of other places already, but just to, solve that relatively simple issue of they already live there, they have a safe way to get there, but they just need a way to carry their bags. And let's see. Okay, so we have the e-bike lending library, another place where local motion is facilitating a lot of this across the state. So your community can have a set of e-bikes that folks are able to rent out for a certain period of time. And this is becoming really popular as people are beginning to use e-bikes more and more as mobility tools. And again, going back to the different reasons why people are interested in different types of mobility, e-bikes are becoming more and more popular with folks, especially in more rural locations where we have hills. And they wouldn't be able to ride a bike otherwise, but it's also able to get them from point A to point B outside of a vehicle. And they're also more generally, they have a higher upfront cost, but because Vermont has also instituted an e-bike incentive program, they're becoming more feasible for folks to afford to purchase one. And certainly owning a vehicle in Vermont is pretty expensive. And then the final example I have on this slide is a commuter incentive program we worked with Sustainable Transportation Vermont on. So this was for folks in the Burlington area, and it offered a $75 gift certificate, I think, for 4 to 6 months of changing your mode of transportation. So if you completed that time, you would get the gift certificate. And it had a pretty high success rate. It was about 50% of the folks who did this program who said that they were going to continue their alternative mode of transportation. I think 40 or so said they weren't sure, and 10% said that they were going to go back to their cars. But it's a way that even a relatively small town can afford through a little bit of fundraising to provide, say 50 people with this incentive. And of course, then that person to person relationships afterwards with saying, hey, I did this and I switched, and being able to get other people on board is really meaningful in the aftermath. So going a little bit longer term, this is really where my heart lies, but it's zoning. And just to say that transportation is land use, and to the extent that any town is thinking about what to do to encourage walking and biking, we also need to be talking to our planning commissions about zoning and increasing our residential density in particular. And I believe that Bristol's already doing some good work in this way. A lot of Vermont towns are in the place of not having the water and wastewater infrastructure to support that density. But a lot of towns are working towards updating our bylaws to make it really legal to build what's called missing middle housing. So things like duplexes or triplexes in our existing downtown areas. But that type of density is needed in order to have things like transit, or to have the investments in things like sidewalks and so on and so forth. There's a couple other or many other zoning pieces that we could dive into here, but for the sake of time, I will keep ongoing. Although I will note, just because it's I think going to be an increasing trend, is exploring solutions for snow plows, which often I'm hearing a lot of towns come up as a barrier for things like different traffic calming measures, or resistance to on-street parking, which is also a traffic calming measure, things like that. So the more that we can look to other communities around the world that have done this, dealing with snow and parking, the better off we will be. Innovation, again, we are a rural, cold, snowy place. So in order to actually support walking and biking in a meaningful way, we need to be creative and innovative. This looks like micromobility, micro transit, different types of things like that, but also thinking about what are some of the barriers to folks right now. And Jonathan could talk more about this, but we know that a big barrier is just that a lot of people don't even have bikes. So even where you have the infrastructure, how do we support people to get on bikes and make that a safe and easy and accessible way for them to get to where they need to go? Another thing I wanted to mention is placemaking, which I think is really, really important, especially again, in terms of our winters, which are long, but also can reduce that feeling of safety. And not even the feeling, but the real safety issues of, maybe not having your sidewalks plowed in the wintertime or things like that, or people not feeling comfortable if they don't have access to safe biking gear for the winter time. So towns can do a lot to kind of encourage winter mobility through placemaking and other things that make them feel more safe, but also just more, again, kind of engaging and fun. And then I'm going to leave off here with transportation planning in the bigger sense. The Better Connections grant program from the Agency of Transportation is generally what I recommend looking at here for funding, but looking at multimodal transportation planning. So not just where specifically you might extend a sidewalk or add in some traffic calming, but trying to take in the big picture as you think about your entire village or downtown revitalization efforts, economic development efforts. It's all connected. And so being able to look at it in a broader sense is really helpful. And again, I look at that as somewhat of a longer term solution, just given the planning timeline. But I've also got some partners and resources here, and they should also, there we go, be linked. So I can share these slides as well. Those all have links connected to them for more information. So I have no idea how much longer I talked than I was supposed to.
No, you're good. Let's have some questions. Mark?
Right, I'm keen on traffic islands, but of course that's with plowing, that's a serious issue. Is there a notion of making them like pull them out in the winter or something? I don't know. Or what are some ideas about how to deal with that?
Great question. That's one of those things. So, and this also gets to what Chris was talking about before, the difference between whether the town manages the road or whether VTrans manages the road. And Jonathan might also be able to speak a little bit more specifically to this. If the town manages the road, the town also has the ability to kind of adjust the sides of your plows, which is one way that some folks get around it, is just by having smaller plows. Another thing that some people do is having removable or kind of somewhat temporary islands, but it might be again like planters that are placed in the middle, and those again would not fly with a VTrans road, but you might be able to get away with something like that on a town-owned road. Linda?
Yes, one of my complaints is that, well, we use Shaw's as our grocery store, but even in Middlebury Shaw's, they don't have any bike racks right near them. So if you go and you have your panniers and you go in and you fill them up, you have to walk. Okay, I mean, sometimes they're pretty heavy, and
Yeah.
the nearest place is in the park. And I don't know why Shaws shouldn't be, why can't every Shaw have, or Hannaford's have bike racks? I mean, it's just simple, but it would make a huge difference, because I try to hitch it up to the some sort of post, or it's just awkward. I don't know what we
Yeah.
can do about that.
So I have something to add to that. We've been asked by a couple people about increasing the number of bike racks in the village, and we're doing an audit right now of how many actually exist throughout the village, and then we're hoping to propose potential ideas for that to the select board shortly.
Thank you. That's great.
Jonathan?
Yeah, just to chime in on the bike parking question. There's sort of a long and a short-term answer. The long-term answer is that you really want to have bike parking requirements as part of your development regulations, so that when something gets built, there's a requirement for a certain amount of short-term and long-term bike parking to come with it. So that's something to think about. Short-term, yeah, it is sort of a retrofit thing. It sounds like Chris and the Walk Bike Council are thinking about that, and that's something that Local Motion can certainly help the council with. We do have a vendor relationship with a bike rack manufacturer, so we can provide quotes on the racks as well as siting and design and all that stuff. So it's a great thing to work on improving as a Walk Bike Council.
That's great. Thank you. I have another question. Bristol, the sidewalks are never clear enough for me. I'm petrified of falling in ice.
Yeah.
And so I walk in the middle of the road and I know that's not safe, but that's where it's clear. And I don't know why we can't get those sidewalks clear. And I have a sidewalk to my house. I can keep that clear. So that's an issue for me.
Yeah, and again, I think that's really a kind of a town priorities issue, and highlighting it, especially as a safety issue, is I think how I would approach it. One of our partners, AARP Vermont, works with us a lot on a lot of these topics, and they bring up a lot about how our population is aging, and we are literally not built to accommodate them, both in terms of where our housing is, but also in terms of things like clearing sidewalks. And so it's an issue that I think is going to continue to rise up as a really big problem, but also one that we need to just keep hammering on our select boards and city councils and the state to some extent, but really it's municipalities that are managing our sidewalks, to say that this is kind of an unacceptable safety hazard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on to Jonathan? Okay, thank you, Katie. Very nice.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, Jonathan, you're on.
Okay, can you just pass me hosting abilities or panelist abilities so I can share my screen?
I will. There you go.
Okay. So I'll start off by saying that in a world not built for bikes and for walking necessarily, which ours right now is not, there are a million different problems when you try and walk and bike, and so there are a lot of different things to solve and a lot of different ways to go about doing those things. So Katie did a great job of talking about a lot of the programming that's out there. My presentation is going to be pretty focused on infrastructure, because that is and specifically like street infrastructure, because it is one of the primary obstacles to walking and biking. But again, there is so much to focus on and potentially work on. So it's great that there are local folks thinking about this in Bristol. And as I said, Local Motion is really here to support local walk bike groups like the one you have. We have myself and my colleague Susan Grasso on staff, and that's really a big part of what we do, is spending time going to walk bike council meetings. We provide technical resources, information on funding opportunities, design assistance. We can do the pop-up demonstration projects that Katie mentioned when they're appropriate. We can assist with those community surveys. It's really a wide-ranging suite of services, and it's sort of all tailored to what any given community needs. So Local Motion's mission is to make it safe, accessible, and fun for everybody to walk, bike, and roll in Vermont. And when we say rolling, we're referring to a wide variety of ways to get around. That could include folks who are using a wheelchair to get around town, folks who are using maybe a scooter or a skateboard or an electric skateboard or any of the new various and sundry mobility options that are out there. So this is sort of a graphic. This is a national statistic, but the numbers are pretty similar in Vermont. And it's notable that 52% nationally of trips are 3 miles or less. So that indicates that there's a really strong opportunity to reduce the amount of driving out there by moving a lot more of those short trips to walking, biking, and rolling, and also potentially transit. So what is it that keeps people from, especially biking, for some of those 3 mile trips? Because 3 miles is a great distance to bike. And this is sort of a breakdown of the general population and how they think about biking. So at the top here, we've got this strong and fearless group. And these are the folks that you might see out on 116 right now, riding on the weekend, riding kind of no matter what the infrastructure is, what the cars are doing, they're willing to sort of to risk it out there. The second group, which is about 7% of the population, this is based on some research that was done in 2006, is comfortable enough if there's a painted bike lane or a shoulder. And this is sort of describes me, although even I'm a little uncomfortable when there's just paint between me and a 1,000-pound chunk of metal. The interested but concerned population is like 60% of the general population. So the majority of folks are interested in biking more for transportation, but they look at the streets that we have and they say, hell no, I'm not going to trust that painted line to keep me safe from cars. I need some real protection and separation. And so this is sort of it shows you why when you get on a bike path, you see so many more people out riding and folks that you don't see out riding on the street. It's because that's more of the general population. They feel comfortable on that safe and protected infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And then there's also, a chunk of the population, at least as of 2006, that's just not interested in biking for transportation. And that may really change, as the infrastructure changes. So what we're really trying to achieve is that all ages and abilities infrastructure. And it's important to recognize that communities are going to sort of build in an iterative way oftentimes. So you can look at what Burlington has been building, what a lot of the, Brattleboro, other communities in the state that have been building bike infrastructure. Oftentimes it begins with painted bike lanes. And, to an extent that's okay and probably necessary, but we're trying to get to a point where we're building infrastructure that everyone, from a kid to an older, retired person really feels comfortable riding, because that's more equitable. It's going to get more folks out riding. And it's good. That's what we want to do, right? We want people to be able to get out and use our communities and be safe. So the general approach for creating that AAA or all ages and abilities infrastructure is to either, when you're talking about a street, ensure that the motor vehicle traffic is both going slow enough and that there is little enough of it that it feels really safe on a bike or even walking potentially to just walk in the street. Or if you're not able to do that, if you're not able to slow car speeds down enough or reduce the amount of cars on the road, you really need to provide that kind of physical protection or separation for people walking and biking. So this is sort of a fundamental in terms of creating successful walk-bike infrastructure. So I'm gonna sort of show some examples of what this looks like. So an example of, a street with really low motor vehicle speeds where you can basically share the road. This is in Provincetown. Great place to visit. Everybody loves going to Provincetown, walking around. And that's because it's a really safe, good feeling place. And on foot, you can often walk in the street. Provincetown, I think, was one of the most bike-friendly communities in the country in a contest that was done recently. And it's because they have a lot of these sort of narrow, really calm roads where cars go very slowly. But this is not just something that you see in more populous places. This is actually Warren, Vermont, which did a really fabulous job rebuilding their village center, I think after Irene, and did some traffic calming that works really well. It really slows vehicle speeds, and it's also really well suited to their place. And if you look at this, I mean, there's hardly any signage, right? They're not like yelling at people about what speed to go or to share the road, because the road signals that to people when they're there. And so they know how fast to go. And so you're able to have this really beautiful environment without any visual clutter from signs. And it's all about the design of the road that really enforces that. As speeds go up, in the 20 to 35 mile an hour range, that's where you start to get into really needing some protection for people walking and biking. So in this kind of environment, at a 20 mile an hour, maybe 25, sometimes you can get away with painted bike infrastructure, especially if car volumes are low. But as those speeds go up or the volumes go up, you do start to really need some protection for the bike infrastructure. And for walking, of course, sidewalks are really needed in this kind of environment. And it's important to start to pay attention to what the crossings and the intersections look like to make sure that people walking don't have 70 feet to go from one end of the sidewalk to the other. They have maybe 10, 15, or 20 at most. So making sure those crossings are short so that the exposure time is reduced, and also those narrower crossings slow car speeds, which is super important for safety. This is an example of what maybe like a 25, 30, 35 mile an hour street might look like with really good all ages and abilities bike infrastructure. So in this example, the bike lane is raised up to sidewalk level. So it's on the sidewalk side of the curb as opposed to the car travel side of the curb. This is sort of the next generation of bike infrastructure that's being installed in a lot of places. Burlington is going to have these installed on Main Street and a few other streets in the next few years. I think these are going to make a huge difference in terms of the number of people that are out there riding. That's a pretty expensive thing to build, what I just showed you in the last slide. This is an example of a very low cost thing that you can do. This is a temporary curb extension that we just installed last weekend in Lindenville. This is a demonstration project, so this is not a permanent piece of infrastructure, but it shows how much can be done with just paint and really simple objects that secure to the pavement, like a flex post, or even just like a planter box. Obviously, bigger planter boxes than what are shown here would be used if this was a more permanent thing. But there's sort of an evolution of this kind of temporary infrastructure called a quick build, which uses stuff that you can leave out on the street for years on end, as long as you're maintaining it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be super expensive. Once you get over 35 miles an hour on a street, or really it's a road at that point, the degree of protection and separation certainly needs to increase. The people biking definitely need to be, and the people walking need to be on the other side of the curb from the motor vehicles. And as the speeds go up, that sort of degree of separation and protection needs to increase, right? So, if you're building a bike lane, for example, along IE9, that bike lane can't be right next to the highway. It needs to be pretty far away and with some protection in between. It's also really important to think about how much access there is. So, driveways and intersections along that sidewalk and bike infrastructure, because each one of those points is a point where there could be conflicts and crashes potentially. So ideally, you reduce the number of turning points there are. But if you can't, if there are just intersections, you really need to pay attention to enhancements to make sure that people walking and biking are separated from motor vehicle traffic in time or in space or in both. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So that's a quick sort of overview of what, what best practices are like for infrastructure for encouraging more walking and biking. I'm going to just really quickly go over some of the work that Local Motion has done in the past in Bristol, and then talk about some other strategies to consider. So we did write this walk bike safety audit report that was really focused on making it safer for kids and families to walk to school from different areas of town. I know that this was discussed when that sort of ad hoc group formed. I don't know if anything in here has been implemented, but it has some good recommendations to check out. And then I was pretty closely involved with that ad hoc group, which resulted in the formation of the Walk Bike Committee. There was a variety of proposals made at that point. And I was really happy to see the Walk Bike Committee formed. And Local Motion continues to be available as a resource to the Walk Bike Committee. And we'd definitely like to make it to a meeting at some point and see how we can help you all get some stuff done. And just closing thoughts on some additional potential strategies for walking and biking. I kind of talked through a lot of the infrastructure stuff, but a lot of towns find it helpful to have a walk bike master plan that sort of sets a vision for what the town's network for walking and biking is going to look like. Also usually give sort of a prioritized list of projects and estimated costs so that you have that sort of guide for, here are the things we're trying to do, here's the order we're going to try and do them in, some possible funding sources. That's a great thing to consider, but you shouldn't let it keep you from getting stuff done in the meantime. It sounds like you're already thinking about some dedicated local funding for this kind of infrastructure. That's excellent, but making sure that you've got some money set aside for grant matching funds for ongoing maintenance, making sure that your sidewalk repair program is sufficiently resourced is super important. And then as we were discussing, adding bike parking where there needs to be some. Thinking about culture also is really important, right? Building that sort of local buy-in for all this stuff. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, rides and walks, putting on film screenings, supporting Safe Routes to School with events like, walking school buses or bike buses to help kids get to school and sort of build that community around healthy transportation to school. Katie mentioned our e-bike lending library. I think Bristol hosted that last year, and you can certainly host it again. And then there are a lot of policy things to pursue. Katie mentioned some of these as well around more dense and mixed use development and bike parking requirements as part of land use regulations as well. So that's my shtick, and looking forward to questions and discussion.
I have a question for you, Jonathan. First of all, thank you. And there's a lot of stuff on your last page that actually there's a lot of those things are actually being dealt with or are in process right now. I have a question about the Lindenville Quick Build project. When we looked into things like that, one of the things that was brought up was that a lot of those types of things aren't USDOT approved. What do you necessarily see that as a barrier to getting some of those things done? Because when we looked at things like more densely painted or art type crosswalks, filled in roads, there was issues with ADA compliance, and USDOT were two of the things that popped up for us. How are you getting, I don't want to say how are you getting around that in Lindenville, but how do you factor some of those things in with those quick build projects?
Yeah, so it all with paint specifically and street art, there are some very specific regulations. And yeah, so it sounds like maybe one of the things you ran into was like an artistic crosswalk is not something you can do. So painting in the crosswalk specifically can create an issue for folks with low vision because they really need those clear blocks to see where the crosswalk is. You have a lot more flexibility when you're not painting in the crosswalk itself or in the traveled way itself. There are still some restrictions on what shades you can use technically, and some other fine, sort of nitty-gritty things. But there's still a lot of opportunity to do creative treatments like this, especially on a more temporary basis. And a lot of it comes down to what the town is willing to approve. Towns have really extensive liability protection for maintenance and operation of their streets. So when select boards are willing to push the envelope a little bit, they're certainly, able to do so.
Thank you.
Our opportunity to ask the experts here. Okay,
Vermont in particular is a challenge. I mean, Vermont in particular seems to me has very narrow roads in general, right? Seems and often like the infrastructure is really fixed that way. I mean, it seems frustrating. Like there's certain things that seem almost insurmountable in terms of that, right?
Yeah, I think narrow roads can be both a blessing and a curse. So drivers, I mean, Chris said it earlier, so drivers really drive at the speed that they feel comfortable going. And probably the primary influence on how comfortable a driver feels is how wide the roadway is. So a wider roadway makes a driver feel like they have a really, wide margin of error. They can see a lot more. And so they, in turn, it's called risk compensation. They in turn go faster, right? Whereas when they perceive that the roadway is narrower, they perceive a higher risk, and so they drive slower. Now that still can create issues, like on a street like Pine Street, where you don't have room for sidewalks. That can still be pretty uncomfortable for a person walking. So it does become a little bit of a what's the better thing to do? Do we try and slow down the vehicle traffic more and keep the road narrow, or do we maybe widen the road so that people have a little more space? My thinking is, like on Pine Street, if you don't have room for sidewalks, I definitely would not widen the road, because that's just going to make cars go faster, and people are biking and walking are still going to have to share the space with cars. In terms of like the many miles of sort of rural, higher speed roads that we have in between communities that are narrow, those are really tough roads to solve, especially because oftentimes, they're cut into the side of a mountain, and so there's ledge in the way, or, steep grades. And, one of the things that I think is important is for us to really focus on improving conditions for walking and biking in communities before we try and tackle those like super expensive projects in rural areas between communities, because they're going to have a relatively low return on investment comparatively.
That makes sense.
I wanted to just say, I read in the Addy Indy that they were looking at Munger Street as a road that they could make safer for bikers by widening it. But the objective to that is that then people will go faster. So what you're saying is so they put a hold on it because they're worried if they make Munger wider, there'll be faster traffic. So, oh dear.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing. It may be the sort of situation where, in that example, widening might make things better for, those strong and fearless riders, or those enthusiastic and confident riders for whom, having that little bit of extra shoulder actually makes a big difference. But for everyone else, for the general population, that shoulder is not going to be enough to make them feel comfortable riding, especially because the cars are not going to be going even faster.
Right. Debbie?
I just want to make a comment that when I go on Pine Street, often there are people walking there. So that keeps me driving slower because there are already people there. Just a thing I was thinking about, because I don't go very fast on Pine Street.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a lot of research into that, and particularly with biking, the number of people that are out biking has a pretty significant influence on how safe it is to bike. Obviously, there's some circular influence there, but when drivers see people biking really frequently, they tend to expect people biking, and so they're looking for them. I think in terms of people walking out on the roadway, it's drivers seeing that potential risk in front of them, and so they slow down. It's when they have sort of that clear open road stretching out in front of them that they tend to put their right foot down harder.
Unless there's a speed limit and there are cops there.
That does it. So if there's here we go, another question. Mark.
Oh, it was just more a comment. Like I know, and I remember this from living in San Francisco, the fun events where you get people all, you go out on a Friday afternoon and a bunch of bikers and all bike around town, and it leads to a more bikey, right? Feeling, right? It instills. That would be kind of something fun to pursue.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's a great thing to do, and I think the sort of more chill you can keep those rides, the better, right? Like even if it's like a 10 or 15-minute ride that ends at an ice cream place, like that's perfect, and people just hang out and talk. Maybe there's a longer ride afterwards for the people that want to do it, but yeah, it's really about building that community and culture and just having fun.
Getting people out there.
Well, I want to thank all our presenters so much for just getting our minds going and thinking about this. And I'm trying to how we can conclude. And I think that we really need to support Chris. We need to get whoever we can get on his committee. This is terrible that he's having committee meetings and then they can't have a quorum. So ask your friends, get on it. I think that's a key thing. And I know that with our ARPA funding for Bristol, that they have in there a grant writer paying for a grant writer for.
Yes.
So between getting you your committee that you need, that seems to be our priority. We've got a grant writer that can help you do what you want to do.
We are very excited about that. Mark, I know you asked this question a couple of times. The quorum is quorum. We've talked with Ian about that. You cannot change the rules of what a committee's numbers are, nor can you change the ratio that you need for a quorum, unfortunately. And we will, I don't want to overstate the challenge. It is a real challenge we've been facing. We will get through it. But we are very excited about the grant writing position. We are very excited about the mindset that the overall select board seems to be in when it comes to ARPA funding right now. We have some cross pollination with the rec club and some of the rec department, some other groups, and it sounds like there is a real bias for action when it comes to the select board and the ARPA funds. So hopefully good things ahead.
That's great. And I think probably the key things we need is more bike racks and we need clear sidewalks.
Just one note on the sidewalk thing, because Jonathan also mentioned it. We actually we partnered with a class at Middlebury College that needed a senior project or a class project. And they did a comprehensive app-based, very thorough and nuanced, complete sidewalk audit of Bristol. They just completed it. They presented their findings to Valerie and the gang at the town hall. It's excruciatingly detailed in its assessment of every single block meaning like every single 4 foot by 4 foot piece of the sidewalks in the village. Valerie is going to use that to figure out where the next sidewalks need to be fixed and continue using it in the future to plan for sidewalk maintenance and repair. So that's, I thank you for giving me the opening to mention that. So the town is on that. These great kids at Middlebury did that.
That's great.
And all that information is going to be available from that survey for public consumption.
That's super.
Nice.
Okay, well, we'll try to get you a committee. All right, everybody, get your friends on this committee and attend the meetings.
And what we'll do is we'll let you all know when we're meeting, when our meetings are. Meetings are at the same time every month. But we'd love to have community engagement, and certainly, Linda, it's great to hear that you're on Pine Street. Spread the word. We're here to intake anybody saying, hey, I think there's a problem here that needs to be solved or needs to be looked at. Let us know. That's really what the select board's looking for us to be as the conduit for those kinds of ideas and that kind of feedback about the infrastructure that's there.
Do you meet on Zoom?
We do, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
you'll
I'll
let us
send-
know, you'll let us know when the meetings are.
I will. I'll share all that with you. I'll put a package together of links to not just the meetings, but some of the topics that were discussed, the Tri-Town bike loop. And I even, while we were on the call, I found some of the traffic, the speed surveys for each of the streets within Bristol Village. And it shows actually what they got from between a week and 2 weeks of surveying some of those streets, all those streets, I should say.
That's great, Chris. That's wonderful.
Nice.
Got all the right people tonight.
Yes.
So I want to, oh, Sally, you didn't say anything tonight. Do you have anything you want to say?
I know, I kept about to say something and I'm like, oh, I think it's got covered. That's all right. I must say, I really appreciated the little bit at the end about walking on Pine Street and biking places instead of avoiding those. I usually avoid them because I don't want to be there. And now, no, I should walk there and be a part of it and create the culture of we walk here and help slow the traffic. So that was a really good reminder to me. Yeah, I don't have any questions. I mean, I really appreciate everything that was talked about, and yeah, I'm glad for all the interest and the information available and the work that's going on, and so great.
And you probably have some friends we can get on Chris's group.
Maybe.
Okay. Let your committee know. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all three of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
We're
thanks. This is
we're
great.
gonna let you go. We've got to go into a little Bristol committee meeting on way forward. So thank you so much for spending this hour and a half with us.
Great. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.